On today's show, the Hawks have been very busy for the last 2 weeks, and the first big move they made was acquiring Kristaps Porzingis. It's time for a deep dive into what the Hawks are going to be getting for Porzingis this season, and we'll get into all of that right now.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 2016 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Sunday morning here in early July. And today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook. And right now, if you're a new customer, get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins at FanDuel. I also want to encourage you at the top of the show to make Locked On Hawks your first listen each and every day. Check us out and subscribe to the show anywhere you find your podcasts. Apple, Spotify. We're also on YouTube, so please like this video as you're watching it. And of course, be sure to tell your friends about the pod as well. I'll be joined in a moment by Noa Dalzell, an expert on the Celtics and Porzingis by proxy. But first, I want to say we recorded this show about a week ago. I want to go ahead and get it out there. I've been teasing it for a little while. It's a deep dive into Porzingis. But first, it is Sunday morning as I'm recording this portion of the podcast, and the moratorium comes to an end at noon Eastern on Sunday. If you listen to the show on Thursday evening into Friday, I cover this a little bit. The Hawks will start doing a lot of their official business beginning today, later today. The Porzingis trade, the Alexander Walker sign-in trade, the Kennard signing, the Capella sign-in trade, all of that has been reported and locked up, but also none of it's official until at least Sunday. So keep that in mind. I'm recording this on Sunday morning. Wanted to get it out to you as fast as possible to begin the new week. So keep that in mind. And I'll clean up any more details later on this week when I have more shows. I'll also be traveling later on this week out to Las Vegas. So stay tuned for all that coverage of Summer League, etc. I have more guests lined up. It's going to be a lot of fun on the show. So please stay tuned and subscribe to the podcast. With that said, Noa does a great job covering the Celtics. She covers them for CLNS out in Boston, as well as some other national work about the NBA and WNBA at SB Nation. Does a great job, and I wanted to talk to her about Porzingis offensively, defensively, culture stuff, how he fits, strengths, weaknesses, and it's all coming up in just a second. But hey, one more time, stay tuned. Much more content coming up this week. Here we go with Noa Dalzell and a deep dive into Kristaps Porzingis. I am joined now by a much more qualified person to talk about Kristaps Porzingis than I am. Noa, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
It's going to be fun to talk about this topic, even though maybe not for you. I don't know how you feel about this entire exercise with the Celtics and the tear down and everything that's kind of happened. Not full tear down. I shouldn't use that. I shouldn't use that term. But I kind of want to actually ask you a question by proxy that I've been getting. I try to explain some of the financial stuff with Boston and like when I broke the trade down, and a lot of questions I got about like why the price was so low basically for Porzingis and like why Boston would do this and what the motivations are there. So I'll ask the expert, like why did the Celtics do a move like this and why did they do this? And what do you kind of make of it from their side of things?
Yeah, so the first thing that I'll say is Celtics have been extremely expensive for years now. They've been in the second apron, and it was pretty much a fact, I think, that they were going to get out of the second apron this offseason and as quickly as possible so that they could start having the flexibility of aggregating salaries and doing these boring transactional things that you can only do if you're below the second apron. So I think that there was a sense of urgency that they wanted to do it early in the offseason. The two players that to me were always going to be the first to go were Jrue Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis, and both of those guys get dealt within 24 hours of each other right after Game 7 pretty much. So it was going to happen at the beginning of the offseason. I think what surprised me a little bit is that Jrue Holiday, who was the other player, had much higher value. Like they were able to actually get a positive asset back, 2 second-round picks. They get Anthony Simons back from the Blazers. Porzingis, they get just Niang back. But they do shed like $14 million off their payroll, and that move immediately gets them below the second apron. So I think there was a huge financial motivation there to do it, not just to get there, but to do it so fast and early in the offseason, and that the Hawks were a willing partner. Why was his trade value so low? Because they ultimately don't get much back. No offense to Georges Niang, who I know has had a long career as a good backup, shooter. But he had just an abysmal postseason. He really did. And I'm sure a lot of people know that, but having covered him in Boston for the past 2 years, the drop-off from the regular season to the playoffs was enormous. And there were some health things going on, and a lot of it is still a little bit uncertain, but I would imagine that really tanked his trade value. You're selling low as possible right now, and the Hawks are buying very low right now.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And the way I kind of framed it was, I think all three teams involved, Brooklyn just kind of gets to take on a salary, get a first round pick for it. Boston gets to save a bunch of money. Hawks buy low on a really talented guy at his lowest point when it made sense for kind of everybody. I do want to come back to the injury and health stuff because, of course, that's a big topic with Kristaps. I don't want to ask about it first, so we'll do that in a second.
Yeah.
But putting that to the side, until the playoffs, which I agree with what, obviously I'm not covering the way you are, but he was not the same guy in the playoffs. But prior to that, this last season, how do you think he looked? And how do you think he might look going into his, age 30 season, this coming season? If he's back and healthy, which he seems to be, he's saying all the right things. How did he play until the playoffs?
So he was awesome last year. He averaged 19.5 points per game on 49% shooting. He's been enormously efficient since he got to Boston. His first season, he was one of the most efficient post players in the NBA on post-ups. Then he had a great three-point shooting season his second year, shot above 40%. Defensively, I saw a marked improvement in his ability to switch, to guard on the perimeter, protect the rim, even from when he got to Boston to when he left, excluding the playoffs. And I think there was just, he's just a great offensive talent. They call him the unicorn for a reason. When he's healthy and when he's available, he made this team dynamic and pretty much unstoppable at times. And not the thing that always to me is the most remarkable part of his game is the depth of his range. So not only is he a 7-footer, maybe even a little bit more than that can shoot threes at a high clip, but he stretches out the defense so far out because of how far he can shoot the 3-point shot. He actually prefers to shoot a foot behind the line than having his foot right at the line. So he's a cheat code for you offensively. And above that, he's just a wonderful guy to cover with the fans, the media. He's willing to talk in the lowest moments, which as a reporter, it's very nice to have somebody like that around. Connects with all the fans before the game, waves to the fans. Nobody on the Celtics in the last 2 years has connected with the fan base the way that he has. So just a very uplifting, positive guy to be around. And I don't think that that's exclusive to Boston. I think that he was like that in Washington. I think that he has kind of, maybe earlier in his career he wasn't, but I'm sure he'll be like that in Atlanta as well.
Yeah, I think, you mentioned the 3-point shooting. I was going to ask you about that because everyone kind of knows that's a lot of the appeal with Kristaps. But I'm glad you brought up the sheer, range of what he can do. And there are archetypes of guys who can do what he does, which is that unicorn archetype, protect the rim, shoot threes. But the way that he shoots them and the volume that he shoots them is what kind of strikes me almost the most. Obviously, there's some inside the arc questions too. But was that? It felt like it was a little bit different in Boston. I know I actually looked at the numbers today, and I was surprised they weren't even more different in terms of the volume. But he took 6 per game basically in Boston, and for a guy playing 30 minutes a night at center, that's a crazy high number. And I know Boston emphasizes three-point shooting more than most teams, if not all teams. But was that a product of that, or is he just super comfortable just letting it fly at this point? Is he just wired to do that?
Yeah, and honestly, I think he could take more threes elsewhere because with the Celtics, when they were fully healthy, you have Tatum and Brown, who are each 20 shot per game players. You have Peyton Pritchard, who was having a breakout season, was the best shooter on the team last year. Then you have Derek White and Drew Holiday, 2 Olympic basketball guards. So it's hard to get your touches in Boston with the way this team was at full strength. So I actually think that he could be even an even higher volume player, and that's why I think he could be an all-star next year. If he's healthy, that's his ceiling. And the East is going to be weak, and there's going to be a lot of star players out, and he can really, really shoot the ball, and he can be a little bit inconsistent. He's had some slumps, but that's kind of the name of the game of being a shooter. I don't know that he's significantly more inconsistent than your average 3-point shooter.
Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, and summer sports are in full swing. Whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the greens, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel's the best way to make every single game even more exciting. You're already following the action, so why not make it a little bit more thrilling for you? You can use FanDuel to track your favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh all the time with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. They have offerings across the sports betting space at FanDuel that includes point spreads, totals, money lines, game props, futures, player props, live betting, and same-game parlays as well. And they have every sport and league you can think of at FanDuel. That, of course, includes the NBA, which we discuss all the time on this podcast, plus the NFL, MLB, college sports, NHL, UFC, golf, tennis, soccer, boxing, and everything in between. It's easy to use, fast to pay out. It even makes all the regular season games feel like must-watch events. Whether you're placing a same-game parlay or just watching a bet right into the ninth inning in baseball, FanDuel makes it feel like you're actually just part of the action. And if you're new to FanDuel, if you're a new customer, bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins at FanDuel. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Inside the arc is interesting with Kristaps because I think early in his career, that was a pretty big weakness, especially when compared to a guy that is his size. He was a sub 50% 2-point shooting guy for the first 4 or 5 years of his career. And now it was 57, 58% in Boston. And I wonder, obviously some of that's improvement on him, but how much of that is his own gains and what have you seen there? And also how much credit should go to Boston's infrastructure and how much space they create? Because obviously that's the perfect kind of setting for a lot of guys to attack the rim. So does that make sense? Like how much of it is him leveling up there and like his post games improved, like you mentioned before? Is that going to translate elsewhere when they don't have maybe as much shooting around him as they do in Boston?
Yeah, I think that he definitely improved. A lot of it was hunting mismatches, and so it's always a question to me of like what happens when he doesn't get those mismatches. And in Boston, their offense really was has been centered around over the last few years around hunting mismatches, and have been a lot of them on the floor for almost everybody on the court. So he was a beneficiary of that. I think the biggest question is, the physicality, because when it was playoff basketball and there was more physicality, or when they played against teams or players that were more physical, he sometimes struggled. And so when he gets the switch that he wants and he gets that smaller guy on him, he's really adept at drawing fouls. He maybe was the best foul drawer on the team last year. And then, obviously a really good free throw shooter too. So like that was a huge like release valve that the Celtics have had in their offense over the last few years, is throw it to him in the post in a late game moment and like he'll get fouled and go to the line. But then you saw certain situations that it almost can get taken away from him. And so that's what's confounding a little bit about him, is that he's a great basketball player, but most great basketball players, like they're always kind of great. And maybe they have a bad shooting game, but they had a bad shooting game. To me, when he struggled, a lot of times it was the opposing team kind of took him out of it. And that's what was a little bit unusual to watch. Even like in last year's playoff run, which he played like 5 games, so it's hard to make too many assertions, but it looked like it was going to be a little bit of a tough series for him against Miami. In that game 2 in Boston at home, like their physicality really got to him. And I remember being like, whoa, this is not the same player that's been like the savior for the Celtics all season. And then this year, that pretty much was the case the entire postseason. So that's the biggest question, is when he can't get that mismatch and when he's battling against one of these really kind of physical bigs, of which there are many in the league, like there are some questions around how he will perform.
That's actually interesting. I was going to ask you a similar question about his consistency, because like season to season, a lot of his numbers look the same, and in a good way. They all look really good. Like it's kind of a similar profile a lot of seasons. But I've always thought of him as a guy that was like kind of hit and miss, and not in like I don't mean that in a super negative way. It's just that he's kind of, so I'm interested to hear you say that, because I'm sure Hawks will wonder like, what's it going to look like every night? Because he's just a different kind of player than they've had really at any point in this recent era. So, I mean, you kind of already answered it, but it's like, is there something that you could do to neutralize that? Is there a best way to deploy him in your mind?
Yeah, I think that it's good for him that he benefited from not being like the primary scoring option. I think that made him more consistent. Like at the end of the day, the team went as Tatum and Brown went, and then obviously having 2 elite guards, like there wasn't this pressure that he had to be the 30-point, 20-point per game scorer, though he ended up being a 19.5 point per game scorer, which is obviously a lot on high efficiency. But the reason I like his fit in Atlanta, and I actually had Atlanta as like my target for him, like for his sake, not for the Celtics' sake, because I think that, and obviously you're more familiar with the situation exactly than me, but he's a guy that's going to get you 6 wins more than you probably were going to have. Like he's a very consistent regular season player. I didn't like him necessarily on like a championship contender where like he's coming in and like what they really need is for him to perform in the playoffs or in the finals, because I don't know he's proven. Like I'm not saying that he will never be able to be that, and that I will never take away how much he contributed in the 2024 finals, and specifically in game 1, most magical in-person performance I've ever seen from a Celtics player, like how he was able to come back from a multi-week absence. So he's had good moments, but I don't really know how to explain his postseason inconsistencies throughout his career. I know the number one thing I would probably say is just the physicality being upped and like less fouls being called, and he really benefits from, he's not somebody that fouls a whole lot, but he does get fouled. And so like he kind of disproportionately, struggles with that. But I think he's going to be a good fit on a team that's just kind of middling a little bit, but that's trying to make a push, I would imagine, to make the playoffs and to make a little bit of a run.
Yeah, and on the foul drawing, Trae Young draws a lot of fouls. Everyone kind of knows that about him. But the Hawks really haven't had a guy that alongside him that gets to the line a lot. It's actually been a relative weakness, and that Trae's been able to do it so much that it's not been a problem. But is that a natural thing for Porzingis? Is he just because of it's just mostly he's just so big? Honestly, I don't know how I would have put that otherwise. But like he's been able to get to the line more and more during his career. Is that like preternatural, or is it just because he's such a massive person? It doesn't really matter which way it happens, but it does happen. It seems like that's sustainable in your mind.
Yeah, he has this like underhand swoop move that he makes where he gets the ball and he kind of forces the contact and flails up. Like we would always talk about, if there is a flopper on the Celtics, it's Porzingis. I think that there's lots of floppers in the NBA, but unfortunately, a lot of the Celtic stars like Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown do not really flop, and they complain all the time about not getting calls, but they also don't embellish contact. Porzingis is really good at that. Like the second there's a hand on his wrist, he's flailing, he's doing the motion, and so I think he has a couple, like if you look at his game and like if you go through his film, it's like a couple moves that he really, really relies on. And that's the challenge a little bit. It's that he's initiating that contact really. And that there's a question to me a little bit about, is he too dependent on that? And that if you play a smart defender, like in Dallas, when they played Dallas, the Mavericks they played right into his hands. Like they really, like they had Derek Lively on him, rookie, like fell for all of his veteran moves. And then there have also been times where whoever's been guarding him has been like not falling for it, and then he seems a little bit hamstrung. So I don't want to say his game is dependent on foul baiting, because he's obviously an elite shooter. He's a rim threat. He's a lob threat. I think that he'll be a good lob threat for Trae Young. Like I don't know that the Celtics really had somebody that prioritized that, but so he has multiple dimensions to his game. But that the foul baiting or the foul drawing, however you want to call it, is something that's come and gone depending on his matchup and how a game is being officiated. And that's where I think sometimes he struggles.
I know Boston is obviously predicated on the two big wings and the two big forwards they have, but they have great guards, like you mentioned. But they don't have someone like Trae Young. It's a different situation. Trae's that pure point guard, orchestrator, has the ball in his hands all the time. How do you see Porzingis fitting with a player like that? I think obviously Trae can set him up, but it will be very different than what Boston had. So how do you kind of envision that if you had to guess?
I think he'll benefit from it. It's hard to say because everybody, I'm really high on like all the Celtics players of the last few years. Like I'm a big believer in them, but it's hard to gauge exactly how much they benefited from the presence of two all-star wings that command so much defense. And like, so I have a lot of questions for next season around like, how is Peyton Pritchard going to look? How is Derek White going to look? Porzingis is one of those guys where I'm not sure, like he didn't really get doubled much. Like maybe he gets doubled a little bit more in Atlanta. I could see that, but I think that overall this is going to be a good fit for him, specifically because of Trae Young's playmaking. And I know that Trae Young is one of the league's elite lob throwers, guys that can really set up a player like Porzingis. I think it's going to be a perfect match. I remember a few years ago, people were talking about what about Trae Young in San Antonio and like him and Wemby being a potential duo that would work. He's not Wemby, they're different, but that same vision that I think got Spurs fans excited is the same vision that I could see really playing out in Atlanta.
I know I asked you about his offense quite a bit already. I want to ask you about the defense a little bit too. I know rim protection is his calling card by the numbers, by just everything that you watch with him. But there's also like kind of less consensus that I find about the other things about Porzingis. Like you mentioned his improvements elsewhere. For Hawks fans that haven't maybe watched him a ton, like what is the archetype on defense other than just being incredibly tall, which does obviously help things and is the first time the Hawks have had that for a while. What do you make of his defense and like where is maybe areas that he's not the best, et cetera?
The thing that he's definitely a good rim protector. The thing that he struggles with at times, and he's gotten better at it, is playing out on the perimeter. And to be honest, like the standard in Boston is really high because Al Horford is one of this generation's like elite switch defenders. And yes, he's 38 years old, but he's still pretty good at it, and he's still better at it than Porzingis was. And so sometimes he did feel like a little bit of a liability out there when it came to teams kind of hunting him, and they hunt Al too. Right? And sometimes Al was on the wrong end of a Donovan Mitchell heater or something like that. But I've seen Porzingis struggle for an extended stretch defensively in a way that I really haven't seen many Celtics players struggle. Like, I don't know how much you caught of the Celtics Magic series this past spring, but it was a pretty hard watch just seeing how Franz Wagner just destroyed him in that matchup. To this day, I don't really understand like why it was such a tough matchup for Porzingis. Like obviously Franz is a great player and like, he can drive and finish really well, but it's that type of archetype that I think that he has struggled with over the years. So if you want to come down to earth a little bit on defensive expectations, watch a little bit from that series because that was one of the most uneven matchups that I've seen. So it really depends on how he's used, but it's the same thing with a lot of these guys. Like, I mean, you talk about Rudy Gobert, right? Like a 4-time defensive player of the year. And there are times where he looks like a defensive liability out there.
Yep.
So there are just inherent things when you're that build of like the 7-footer that protects the rim, where in today's NBA, like sometimes that doesn't always play out the best, right? And so there are moments where you're like, I thought this guy was supposed to be a great defender, and like he's been getting cooked all night, right? And I think Porzingis really embodies that.
This is maybe kind of a nerdy question, but I know you're a sicko like I am with this stuff. But how did the Celtics kind of surround and like protect him defensively? Because that sounds worse than I mean it to.
Yeah.
But a guy like that, who what the weaknesses are, what the strengths are, Boston again has those big wings. But the Hawks do have some big wings too. They're not Tatum and Brown, but they have that. They're kind of building that same kind of archetype out potentially. How did you see them try to maximize Porzingis' strengths on defense?
Yeah, I mean, I think the unique thing about the Celtics roster is that there were very few defensive deficiencies. So, like, there were times where they really tried to avoid the switch on specific players that were targeting him because they have Tatum, who can pretty much guard 1 through 5, Jaylen Brown, who, when he's healthy, he's one of the league's elite defenders. Like, that's one thing. And then the other thing I think with some teams, and this will probably be different in Atlanta, but they have such strong perimeter defenders that they like could sometimes make like a point to funnel them to Porzingis if they wanted, but there were also situations where it didn't make sense to do that. And with Drew Holiday and Derek White, like you have a little bit more discretion than usual. So I think that there were moments where they really had it going with him defensively. And so I don't know what exactly it was in the postseason. It gets really hard to understand. And I'm sure we'll talk a bit about the illness that he dealt with and kind of like how much that came into effect. The other thing is that because he battled so many different injuries, it felt like a lot of times you were resetting with him. So like it would feel like there was progress and then he missed some time and then he would come back and you'd be like, okay, he's struggling defensively, but like it's just because he's getting his win back under him or that sort of thing. So that's another thing that just makes it a little bit harder to evaluate like how he fit within the Celtics offense, because it always felt like there was like they were kind of beginning to reintegrate him a little bit.
Yeah, so on the health front, it's nuanced because there's the illness part of this, and then there's the like other injury history part of this. The most recent thing was the illness that he battled last year. I know that like it was just a big mystery from what it sounds like. I'm not going to ask you like what it was. We don't kind of know. He seems to be fine, but like what was kind of the consensus around the team? Like what did you make of that? Was it like a long-term concern? Like it's unfair to you to ask that, but I don't know what to make of it.
No, I'll give you with like my understanding. So he starting in late February, he's sick, right? Like no big deal. Just like listed as sick in the injury report, and then it just keeps going and keeps going, and like he just keeps being on the injury report. And now it's been a week and 2 weeks, and it's like, is he okay? Like and he's around, and he was coughing a little bit, like being in the locker room. I was like, okay, he's coughing, but he's around the team, so like they must know he's not contagious. And then he misses 11 games for it, which obviously is a lot for an illness, especially because he had already missed like the first couple months of the season, recovering from this like weird leg surgery that he had for a rare ankle injury that he had suffered in the finals. So, I was kind of like, damn, like he's going to end up missing as much time for this injury, for this illness, as he almost did for the surgery in the fall. And then comes back. His first game back is against Brooklyn. He was awesome. And one of the things that you'll see about Porzingis, hopefully he doesn't have many injuries, but normally when he misses time, he comes back and doesn't miss a beat. Like I always say, he's an expert at coming back from injuries because he has so much experience doing it. So he came back, was really good right away, and was always updating us, very communicative with the media, very comfortable answering questions about how he's doing with various ailments. And he would literally give me like a percentage. I would always ask him like, how are you doing? And he'd be like, I'm at 80%, I'm at 83%, I'm at 90%, like, as he was working back. And so it seemed like he was getting better and better. And then playoffs come around and he really, really struggles against Orlando, but there's no reporting or anything that he's dealing with an illness. And then the New York series comes along, and now it's like he's not finishing games. He is leaving at halftime, and Joe Mazzulla tells us plainly that he can't breathe and that it's something that he has been dealing with on and off since he returned from that illness. So we didn't really know that it was bothering him even in those weeks coming back. Like I figured, if you have a really bad cold, sometimes like it does linger a little bit, but I think it was a little bit more of like it came in waves, and that's how he explained it to us, like on the record, that sometimes he'd be feeling really good, and then one day he'd wake up and not feel good, or sometimes he'd have a workout and it would feel great, and then he would have a massive crash after. So we never got any specifics around like what it actually was. To my understanding, they don't know. Like, I don't get the sense at all that this was something that they had an illness for and like they just didn't want to say, which would be his right. Like, that's, his privacy. But I would be surprised if he had like a diagnosis that just never came out, because that was not at all my sense around it. So I think it was just what Brad Stevens called it was a post-viral syndrome. And with today's era with COVID and other things, I don't know exactly what it was, but that's my understanding. And he's playing on the national team in August, and hopefully it's smooth sailing and it's all behind him. But it definitely was a big part of, the storyline as it related to him for the second half of the year here in Boston.
No, that's really helpful. And, having not been there, on the outside, it's like, he's still sick. Like, it's kind of, everybody's kind of just baffled by what was going on. Not in a like accusatory way of him. It's just kind of was a strange thing. So there's that, obviously, and hopefully he is feeling good. And he said he was on the record, like I said, on his own social media this week. Then there's the other part of this, of the other durability questions. He is a 7-foot+ guy. He's had a bunch of injury issues, and not the same thing either. It's not like it's one chronic thing. He's had multiple different things. What do you think about that, especially as going into age 30 season, not knowing anything, but just as a person, like what if you're the Hawks, for instance? Can you project him for 60 games? Is that too many? It's just like one of those hard things. I wonder what you think about his durability overall.
Yeah, probably maybe a little bit less, something in that range. But the thing for him, it's been leg injuries, right? He's had a meniscus tear, he's had an ACL tear, he's had, just through his time in the Celtics, he's had some ankle injuries, he's had that rare, I still can't pronounce it, the thing that he had surgery for. He's had quad strains, it's really leg injuries is what's hampered him. And I think that a lot of times those things can be connected. Like, he missed most of the 2024 playoffs with a quad strain and then came back and then hurt his leg. And I would imagine that there's a chance that those things were connected. So that's where he's kind of deals with the most, is that sort of thing. He is, I've everything I understand, is a good work ethic, like relentless at coming back. The Celtics were very careful with him. So whenever there was something, they held him out as long as possible. So he could have, if you look at his game logs, like it's actually, he probably could have played in more games than he played in. I don't know what Atlanta's mindset is going to be for them. It was always like, we need him for the finals. And so we're going to save him for the playoffs. And like, it didn't really work out because he still wasn't really that available, but that was always the thinking, that they were going to load manage him. I don't know if he will be load managed. But I hate terming guys as injury prone because it's like not fair to them, but he is injury prone. Like, that's kind of undeniable. And I think that's part of the bargain with signing him, is that if you're planning on building around him or having him be your cornerstone, you're going to have a plan for what your team is going to look like when he's not available, because he is inevitably going to have things. And hopefully the most serious things are behind him. But it was a lot of different things that he dealt with during the 2 years in Boston. And I think those 2 years were relatively healthy compared to other stints of his career too. Yeah,
and I actually looked. It's just this last season, he didn't play any back-to-backs at all, and I wonder.
He doesn't do back-to-backs.
I was gonna say that's just gonna be probably forever, I would imagine.
So I don't know. I mean, Al Horford didn't do back-to-backs either, so they split them. I don't know. Okay. I don't know if like other teams would have the same thing, but for the Celtics, it was like, we're just splitting those guys into back-to-backs.
Yeah, it's logical, and they have. Of course, the roster they had was loaded, and they could be, like you said, be careful with him. I'll let you get out here in a second. I did want to make sure I asked this question because it's kind of relative to where the Hawks are too. He played a lot with another big, played with Al sometimes, even with like, Cornette or whoever, Tillman. There's all kinds of guys that have been there, but also played a lot with like Tatum at the 4, for example. The Hawks have similar in that they could play him with Okongwu, who's been their incumbent center, but can play with Porzingis. And then they also have like a more traditional, maybe less traditional, smaller guys like Jalen Johnson at the 4. Does he seem to have like is he better in one way or the other? Is he more comfortable playing next to another big or playing small around him? Does it matter? What do you think of that kind of alignment question?
Yeah, it depends about the other big's versatility. Like, I think if the other big is like Al is pretty much as versatile as they come. Like, that was a pretty good duo. I didn't really love Porzingis and Luke. Like, I think that you had two guys in the Luke Cornette. Like, those are two guys on the perimeter that now you're potentially targeting. So it depends. Yeah. I liked him better with Tatum at the 4 and him at the 5. But if you look at that starting 5 lineup of, Tatum, Brown, White, Holiday, and Porzingis, this year they weren't that good. And they were actually better when Porzingis sat and Horford played. And that was like a huge discussion topic of like, why is this lineup better with Horford? So, it's hard to say, but I think that if I had to think about like his optimal matchup, he'd probably be at the 5 alongside somebody that's a little bit more versatile, just because I think that plays to his strengths defensively a little bit better. But offensively, he stretches the floor like anybody else. Like, he space the floor. So, like, that gives you options, right? Like, nobody in today's NBA wants 2 non-shooters out there. So it does help you that he is very much a shooter, except for this most recent playoff run. But for the most part, like, he does space the floor pretty well.
Yeah, and this I wouldn't say this, but we're about to sign off. But Al Horford is, of course, a former Hawk, and I covered him for a long time. And Okongwu is not Al Horford, but they do have a lot of similarities as far as like people that talk about their heights and all these things. So him being next to Porzingis is going to be interesting to watch, because I feel like I've already kind of seen it, even though Al is obviously much more accomplished than Okongwu at this point. You said it earlier, but I was going to ask you what it's like to cover him. Seems like it was really a good experience that you really enjoyed. Like, for fans' purposes, I don't always do a lot of this on the show, but it's like, seems like people like the guy. I mean, early in his career, it was kind of like, is like, what's going on with him? But now it's like, he seems like a fan favorite almost in some ways.
Yeah, he's definitely a fan favorite. I mean, Celtics fans are brutal. Like, the bar is so high. People were really upset at how he played in the playoffs, despite the fact that he was sick and dealing with stuff. But like, I think he was like 7 points per game and shot 15% from 3. And like, it was, I felt bad. Like, I would post clips of his post-game quotes, and the replies would be like, we don't want to hear from him. Like, please don't tell us what he said. So other than how it ended, and I think that fans will get over themselves and like remember the big picture with his time in Boston, he was absolutely a fan favorite. Like, really, really connects with the fans, signing autographs before games, after games, high-fiving everybody. Like, a lot of players, they like just kind of come in with a tunnel vision, don't really want to acknowledge the crowd. Like, everywhere he went, because Celtics fans travel really well, he was always engaging with the crowd and everything. And I will say, from a media standpoint, like, we will really, really miss him, because there are a lot of good guys in the Celtics, but a lot of guys that are pretty reserved and like PR trained and, stick to the script. And Porzingis was the best quote on the team, and he knew it, and we told him that. And I think we'll really miss just his candidness and so much respect to him, because honestly, the way things ended, like, I can't imagine how frustrating for him after coming off of that surgery, wanting to play a big role, and then going back to back, and then having such a disappointing, again, just 2 series, right? It's not like it was months of bad basketball, but sometimes that's all that people remember. But even after the worst moments, worst games, worst losses, he was always willing to answer tough questions, and honestly, with a smile on his face. Like, he's, you can ask him anything and he'll be more than happy to answer. And like, I know covering the NBA, like, sometimes high profile players, like, if you see them in the hall, they're not going to really like chat with you and stuff. But Porzingis was somebody that, like, he talks to every person in the arena, whether it's the lowest member of the media or custodian or whoever else it is. Like, that's just the way that he is. So I think that he's a big gain for a franchise and a big loss for the Celtics in that sense of just kind of being this like joyful figure.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting to touch base with him when he's allowed to talk, and when the Hawks are allowed to talk about him. As you and I are talking, this deal can't be announced for like another week plus. We all know the deal. It's one of those weird NBA things, but they'll introduce him at some point. Fans will hear from him, and it sounds like people will be excited to hear from him too. I know Hawks fans are really excited because, number one, you'll find this funny. There's a large portion of the Hawks fan base that it's just anyone who's 7 feet tall, they're really, really excited about, because they haven't had a lot of 7-footers around these parts, and he's obviously a very, very large individual. So that even only that would be exciting to people. Well, thank you again, Noah, for doing this. People should be following your work. I know that Hawks fans don't always love each other, dating back to when I was a very small child. But where can they follow all of your coverage? I think you also do non-Celtic stuff as well. But anything you want to plug, feel free to do so. People should be following you.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter. It's Noa Dalzell. And then I have a podcast on the Celtics, You Got Boston podcast. And I do cover the WNBA. I have some Atlanta Dream stuff coming out actually in the next couple of days. Awesome. So you can find all that coverage on SB Nation. I am an SB Nation alum myself. So shouts to SB Nation. Thank you again for doing this. I very much appreciate it. People should be checking out your work across the board. As for everybody listening to this podcast, please subscribe to Locked on Hawks, and we'll see everybody next time.